Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Contact Lost. If this is your first time here, we are the Polish English-speaking podcast about competitive 40K. And yeah, stay a while and listen because we regularly talk to the best players from most competitive teams, including national teams. We talk about the latest events. We talk about the latest GW releases and so on and so on. But predominantly, we bring you the latest news about the Polish competitive scene, updates about the players, about the team itself, the meta in Poland, the events in Poland, and all that sweet 40K delight in Polish flavor. I'm your host Tomek, also known as Tweak online, and today we have two dominant topics that we are going to talk about. The first one is an event that, for some obscure reason, I don't really hear a lot about on the internet. So I haven't really read a lot about it, but it was like a huge event. So either I can't find information on it or it's just not that popular. So we are going to talk about the 5-man team competition called the Alpine Cup. And then we're going to segue into the balanced data slate and like what it implies. Definitely, we're not going to go through every single change, but the more like the implications of the balanced data slate. So with me today to go through all this and to talk about their experience at the event, I have two esteemed guests. First one, a member of Team Scotland. Please welcome Brian Seipp.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
And it's a pleasure to have you as well. So we'll get to you in a moment. And the second guest, he is a staple. He is a regular. You know him already. The smartest, the most handsome member of Team Poland. We have, unfortunately, a little bit sick, Pumba.
Yo, hello everybody. Definitely not the handsome though.
I would say
I can take the brain part, but definitely not the handsomeness.
Oh, you're adorable. Pumba.
Oh, you're just too modest. Gents, you have traveled to Austria this last weekend to participate in this 5-man event, and you actually managed to take it by storm. So, so congrats because you won. You actually dominated all the other teams. You had a flawless. You were the only team to have the flawless streak of like, I think 5 wins, 10 points altogether. Is that right, Brian? Am I correct in this?
Yeah, we were the only undefeated team, managing to beat some really good ones too.
That's awesome. So I think there were 41 teams at the event altogether.
That is correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's not really a small feat. 41 teams with 5 people. That's like over 200 people. Is it only me, or is this event not really talked about anywhere? Like, have you seen any mentions of it anywhere, or am I imagining something?
Yeah, it's definitely like an event that is focused around European scene, I think. And since the European scene oftentimes includes multinational and multilingual media and podcasts and stuff like that's very close to like WTC representations and more of this style of like mouth-to-mouth marketing is being done, I think, throughout many like national discourse and stuff instead of being super marketed towards English-speaking audience, so to say.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, Brian, was this your first attendance at this event, or have you been there before?
No, this is my my first time at this event, and also first time in Austria too. So that was a lot of fun.
Okay, and so let's talk a little bit about the event to make it maybe a little bit more familiar to our listeners. Maybe we have someone who hasn't been there but would like to go. Where does the idea for the event come from? I hear that this is organized by pretty much the same people who organize the WTC. Is that the right assumption? Pumba, let's start with you, maybe.
That's not entirely true. One of the main organizers for WTC, which is ISIC, who has been around for years now, actually organizes this in correlation, like, and with other people who are local to the area. So with Kevin, that's one of the people I know who is heavily involved in organizing the tournament. So he has basically boots on the ground where the actual tournament takes place, which is Liben in the Austrian Alps. And they together are responsible for holding the whole event, providing terrain and stuff.
Okay.
So this is a kind of a joint effort between some local TOs and people who just wanted to make this a huge event that is very, very international, and someone who has a lot of experience in organizing such events, who definitely is Isaac.
Okay. All right. Brian, tell us something about the rule set, the terrain set. Like, was there anything that took you by surprise? Because I understand that, you are American playing for Team Scotland in Scotland, so probably according to UKTC rules. So was this event any different? Was there anything that you had to specifically, I don't know, change your mindset for?
I would say, coming from a WTC team, I'm very familiar with WTC terrain, and the majority of the boards were WTC terrain sets. I'd say I think it was 3 of the 5 boards were just actual WTC terrain. And then there were 2 of the 5 boards that were on something that's kind of like WTC adjacent, almost, less windows in the buildings, but and slightly larger ruins, but still have a similar kind of structure in terms of vents and crates and stuff like that. So very different from UKTC. They're much more dense for the boards, I believe. But it was good though. I think the maps were pretty interesting. The 2 different ones kind of made the event unique and feel a little bit different than a WTC pure WTC tournament. And definitely informed some of our army decisions that we made coming into the event as well.
Yeah, so we'll get to that in a moment. So I wanted to ask from the perspective of like national teams going into that event, because out of the 41 teams that we had there, we had 2 teams that were formed from purely players from Poland. We had some Polish players mixed into other teams as well. And we had, well, your team that took the first place, where we had 2 representatives of the Polish national team, 2 representatives of the Scottish national team, and we had Anthony, who is part of the Team USA, essentially. So did you approach this tournament in any way as a team preparation for the WTC? Did this give you any sort of insights, any sort of practice, any sort of, I don't know, any other benefits? Taking into consideration that the 10th edition is coming, probably will, turn the world upside down. So was this event in any way beneficial to any of you? Pumba, let's start with you.
So this team was formed in a very weird way, by which I mean neither me or Brian, I think, were initially in the squad that was supposed to come to the event, but due to like family matters, I believe, or basically lives getting in the way of people's plans, we were invited in by Typhus, Ines, and Anthony to participate as basically a bunch of friends who just want to go to the Austrian Alps, do well, and just enjoy their time. And that was the basic like argument for going as that particular team. And I mean, not every day and not every week you can come to an event in such a like international squad, especially when the like Anthony is coming from all the way from USA, spending like a week in Poland and then driving to Austria, right? Yeah, so the basic idea was, instead of doing it super try hard, I don't know, practicing for WTC or whatever you like call that, we just wanted to do kind of well, not stroll, but definitely not go like super ham. But then apparently, if you have basically 3 or 4 captains of WTC teams in, and then people who are basically designed to try hard all the time in the 40K, it turns out you cannot just ignore that part of your brain and turn it off for a little while. So after like a quick brief moment of being, yeah, we'll just take whatever we want and vibe, we just tried it brainstorming all the way. Just the weirdest ideas came to our minds, weirdest team comps, possibilities, and the huge like brainstorm that led us to picking that particular team comp, for example, happened.
Okay, Brian. Again, same question to you. So, did you approach this in any way from the perspective of Team Scotland? How this can be helpful in your preparations for the WTC that's happening during the summer, or was it more of a laid back, let's see what happens kind of event?
Yeah, well, I'd echo what Pumba said. We came into it with a mindset that we were very much going to just vibe and have a good time, and whatever happened, and then we have 5 psychopaths on a team, so we very quickly devolved into looking at maps and checking angles and ruling out armies based off of that. I would say the most interesting and probably contributing thing, at least certainly that I've gained out of the collaboration, was you don't often get to have a discussion about a team makeup with so many high-level players from different teams at the same time. So, having the Polish perspective with the American perspective, and then Ennis and I bringing kind of more the Scottish, if you will, or maybe the UK perspective. It's kind of 3 major poles there in terms of no pun intended. In terms of the what is good or bad in 40K, and seeing the spaces where we aligned and the spaces where we disagreed was really interesting, and some interesting conversations.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, looking at just the names on the team, an absolute powerhouse. But then again, taking a closer look at all the lists and players from Europe that came, it was, I think it's safe to say, a shark tank of an event when it comes to the attendance of strong players and strong teams. So yeah, even the more congratulations to you on taking the first place. Before we get into your preparation and army composition, how did you manage? I don't know. I guess I'm trying to ask. The balanced data slate dropped just before the event, pretty much invalidating the meta that you were going to be playing in. Didn't that sort of kill the vibe for you, that you're going to be playing in something that is already outdated, Pumba?
To be honest, absolutely not. Just looking at the data slate and looking at our team comp, I believe almost none of our armies that we brought are going to be actually impacted by the slate in major way. And the data slate was actually just kind of a soft breeze, generally to the meta. I feel like it wasn't a storm that just is going to shake out things and just completely turn things around. It's not another Armor of Contempt but data slate situation. There are some armies that are going to be hugely impacted by it. Definitely, if we took Dark Angels, for example, and I was playing that list, I would have felt way worse about playing it for the last time at the event, especially that it's not super fun to play just as a list in general and as an army. But because we took Iron Hands that are gonna be just impacted just a bit, that wasn't a huge deal for me. Other than that, I think the fact is when you're coming to an event and the data slate drops Thursday, we are actually almost on the way, and all you're thinking is about this event generally, and the basic thing is to we can discuss things, we can jump ideas off of each other, especially that we have such an opportunity to get different perspectives on the slide coming out. So I had just basically no fall off in morale due to the slide being out.
Okay, Ryan, same for you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the slate. I mean, the obvious significant. We're going to talk about this more later, but the major change from the slate is Dark Angels are dead, right? So, and going into the event, we kind of just recognized that Dark Angel was something we'd have to deal with. But the rest of the matchups, the other 4 matchups, were still really interesting and really exciting to kind of look at and play. And I think that's still true, even with the changes that were made with the Dataslate. So, if at best it changed 20% of our game plan if the slate would have been in or out, and obviously didn't really impact our team makeup significantly as well. I think kind of as Pumba said, I think I asked them about the slate when I got in the car, and they'd already been driving for 10 hours and they hadn't said anything about it. So we talked about it for maybe 5 minutes and then kind of branched off into how bad of a house cat Anthony was.
Interesting. So to our listeners as well, I think the choice of Pumba and Brian has been made not only because they have won the event, but also because their army composition, to which we will get in a moment, actually could be meaningful even for the meta post the slate, because you'll find out in a moment what the army composition was. Essentially, we're talking about armies that haven't really been affected by the data slate, or I'll say even more, armies that aren't actually the top of the meta, if toppest is a word, because the army composition was actually what, orcs.
So that was, if I could just jump in and
Sure.
I'll help you with that. That was Brian playing his orcs goth list, pressure build, which rocked the event. Then there was Typhus, who was bringing Necrons. The meme goes that Gito stole his list, but the actual thing is that they collaborated and basically Gito told him what to bring to the event. Gito being the Polish national team Necrons players from last year, who absolutely smashed at WTC and is a super faction expert.
It doesn't play anything else ever.
Exactly. So Typhus got basically his list for the tournament. Ines was bringing his trusty old GSC from back when he played at even Coventry, I think. The list almost hasn't changed. Anthony is currently World Eater's main and has been playing them for Oblivion, so that's what he brought. And I jumped into the broken Space Marines factions, almost at the last minute, choosing Iron Hands over Dark Angels, convinced by Ines and Brian doing incredible things at Home Nations at other singles events in the UK, convincing me that they are the go-to faction for Space Marines instead of Angels.
So no Dark Angels, no Guard, no Custodes. Yeah, I mean, the army composition is strong, but you could tweak it and make it even stronger, I guess. So explain to me your army choices. Again, for example, Typhus with Necrons. Necrons don't seem like an overpowered army now. Definitely not an army that could, top an event. So what happened there? What was the reasoning behind bringing Necrons? I don't know. Brian, would you be able to explain that, or should I jump to Pumba?
I can probably tee it off and then Pumba can bring it home. So I would say that when we were looking at Necrons, some of the decisions were really trying to, their army selections were driven towards our individual player strengths, and we kind of bounced around a lot on that. Some of that bouncing happening in the last hour before submission. But in the case of Necrons, we recognize that Typhus had access to Gigo, and he's obviously incredible. Typhus is a very strong player as well, and so the combination of the two was voted really well. And because of Necrons were an army that's very similar, at least in my opinion, that works in the sense of people have a lot of trouble matrixing against it, where they just don't make the right decisions or respect it in the way that they really should. And so one of the ways that we felt like this would play out is people wouldn't have as much respect for this army into Guard as they should, and I think that played out in a number of rounds as well.
Okay, Pumba, was there anything else to that particular choice? I mean, was it difficult for Typhus to actually pick this army up, or did he get like a little piece of paper from Gito saying, with this unit you do this, with this unit you do this, go there, move there, you score like this, and so on and so on?
It's funny you say that because this is exactly what happened. Like, he got a huge write-up on actually what to do in every matchup, almost, from what I believe. Like what unit does what's the stratagem you are supposed to use. He got this whole like package deal of
Essentially
schooling and
Wikipedia,
coaching.
but
Yep.
better.
He got like a full coaching on that list, and that list was particularly designed to counter guard. Because we knew the guard is going to be very strong at this event. They are a very strong army overall, and we needed always when you are trying to go for a 5-man team or any team event, if you are trying to find a counter to an army, one is never enough, right? Because if they defend with it, you need 2 answers. Our 2 answers happen to be Iron Hands, and we need something else, and Ghetto's Necrons, piloted by Typhus, who actually played like at least 4 games before that event with that army, which is, I believe, the most practice he has done in 10 years, I think,
Mm-hmm.
at least, like since ETC 2017 when we were talking to him. So that was the idea. These 2 lists were supposed to counter guard defending and have us comfortable there, which happened a lot, I'm going to tell you right now, during this event. And all of the guard players very much, as Brian said, disrespected the Titan Necron matchup.
Okay, so a little bit of mind games there, and you won. So, by the way, if anyone who's listening is wondering what was in the list, we are not going to mention that in great detail now because I really don't want to like read out lengthy lists and 5 of them, etc., etc. But I forgot to mention we do have a blog now that I post on from time to time. I try to make it as regular as possible, and I also post links to the blog on Reddit. So if you follow Warhammer Competitive on Reddit, you will be able to find that there as well. If you want to go there directly, the link will be in the description of this video. The link is not very complicated. It's just contactlostpodcast.blogspot.com. It was actually more difficult than I assumed. So go there, check it out. By the time this episode is released, the article, the write-up should be there. So the list will be mentioned there as well. So don't worry about it. For now, we are just going to talk about the mind games, the matrices, all that jazz. So yeah, that's my sort of next question. Brian, you, as far as I know, during previous UKTC tournaments, you had a little romance with the Space Marines. Some I think Dark Angels. What?
Iron
Hands.
No, sorry. Yeah, Iron Hands. The other way around. So Iron Hands. Why did you pick Orcs for this one? Is it only because Pumba got Iron Hands, or is it because Orcs is your army?
Let me weave you a tale. My struggles.
I know what's coming.
Okay.
So originally, I was going to be playing Harlequins for this tournament because I was getting a commission army of Harlequins done, and the timing worked out really nice. I was going to get them done. But then the ITT happened, and Pumba's team had Harlequins on there, and they were very difficult to pair, and didn't really perform at the level that they were hoping for. So we decided we were going to switch me from Harlequins to Hail of Doom. You can see where this is going. So I started painting up my Hail of Doom army, which I'm still working on right now. But 30 Dire Avengers, 9 bikes, all that's all already done. And then in the hour or two before the event is about to happen, Anthony and all of us are talking, and we're like, you are really good with orcs. Maybe we could have you on that. Oh, sorry, I forgot an army. No, sorry.
Yeah, you've
Apologies.
got it one step.
I forgot a whole step. So yeah, we're doing painting Hail of Doom, and then they decided, they being my team, the evil people that they are, decided that no, we're going to put you on guard instead. And at this time, Pumbaa's on Dark Angels. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be on guard. And so I get the guard army. I borrow models from everyone. We're 2 hours before list submission, and we're having a discussion. And that's when we realize we should put Pumbaa on Iron Hands. And once we put Pumbaa on Iron Hands, we are looking at the pairings and the matrices, and we're like, this doesn't make sense to have guard anymore because they're not going to get board choice.
Yeah.
So let's switch Brian's army for the 4th time, and give him orcs, which is an army I'm intimately familiar with, and I just played at a WTC practice event here in the UK, and had done quite well with. So it's So in the end, at least I had a list ready to go.
Let's be clear now. Quite well is an understatement.
Yeah.
Because Brian went fucking smashed and bashed the skulls of like 5 WTC class players, including some of the basically Team England captain, which is Robo. And then like, what was your score? Like 90 out of 100, basically, or like 80 out of 100
For the
for Home
the
Nations?
practice one? For Home Nations, it was, I think it was like, it was around 90, I think. 80,
Yeah.
80, high 80s, yeah.
Insane.
Just absolutely smashing people's heads in.
So yeah, so a little spoiler. At this tournament at Alpine Cup, Bryant went 20-0, 20-0, 20-0, 12-8, 20-0. It really sounds like a walk in the park. Was it actually a walk in the park?
Yeah, well, I had some indigestion in round 4, so I disrupted my ability to play. But
Imagine dropping points at it.
I know,
Points
right?
at the event.
It's pretty cringe.
Atrocious.
I think that we were benefit from the fact that pairings, I think, went quite well for us in the first round, and as a result of that, I got a matchup that's pretty good in form of Fail of Doom, and then I smashed it, and then I think, Pumba and Typhus, who were doing most of the pairings for us throughout the tournament, started to kind of realize, like, oh, we can pair for Brian here, and he's probably going to do pretty well. And then that just continued, and so I just kept getting armies that were great into me. A lot of people that, after they sent us their matrices, were just wildly disrespectful of the Orc army and its ability to just, crush you. There are a number of pictures throughout the event of my orcs in their opponent's deployment zone at the top of turn 2, just deep in their deployment zone. I played against Sisters round 3, I think it was round 3, and he had to defend the shrine, and I had about 40 orc boys standing on the shrine objective at the end of turn 2. So it was, stuff like that, where I just don't think people appreciated just the difference between, the typical orc player who are lovely but maybe not the most skilled, and then what that army can do when you know what you're doing and you understand how the combat phase works is pretty significant.
But is it about the orcs currently? And this might be interesting for someone who, I don't know, has just heard of the game, has heard that 10th edition is coming out. We don't really know how orcs are going to change the 10th edition, but I guess some play styles don't really change. So is this army strong because of like secondaries, or is it strong because of the WA rule? Is there anything that you
Yes.
particularly abuse in this army?
So I do a number of, I'll talk orc in general, and then I'll talk about my list. So orcs in general have a very strong secondary game in the form of an automatic 15 with a secondary called Get the Good Bits, where you basically dig through piles of trash to find more parts for killicans, and you get 15 points in secondaries. It's very strong. And then you have a number of other passive secondaries as well you can take, like Green Tide, or my favorite one I always take is actually not orcs at all, but generic, called Behind Enemy Lines, because I don't like my deployment zone and I prefer to make yours mine. So the army feeds very well into that because it's very aggressive. It's called Orc Pressureless for a reason. The idea is you pressure the opponent's army and deny them scoring primary while they have to deal with killing your entire army that's in their face. And while they're scoring lots of points, Necrons have been known to do this as well, in as forms of scoring lots of points and making it hard for your opponent to catch up. Orcs have a secret hidden mode where they just say, hey, if you make a mistake or you just fuck around, you're gonna lose your entire army as well, because orcs deal a lot of damage if you give them the opportunity to. And then my specific army also exploits transports, and specifically emergency disembarkations and turning angles and stuff like that, and activation locking people. So I have 2 battle wagons in my army, and inside the battle wagons are some characters, some Meganobs, and a bunch of Grots. And the Grots' only purpose there is for the Meganobs to walk on the way out of the burning wreckage of the battle wagon, so I can emergency disembark safely and kind of move 6 inches away from my transport, jump behind a wall, and now suddenly half the army that was prepared to shoot the guys that got out can't see anything. And I lose almost none of my offensive capabilities while getting better board position as well.
Yeah, that sounds really intricate. So have you ever had or felt the urge, or I don't know, the temptation maybe, to try out world eaters, because the armies on, well, by in principle they sound at least similar. Uh, Extreme pressure early on. You appear in your opponent's deployment zone pretty quickly, and you just smash them in the face. Have you, yeah, considered maybe picking that army, or not really?
So I've World Eaters, I think, are a very strong army. But I think orcs beat World Eaters. And so I kind of would rather play the army that beats them, that does the same thing. But they're not quite the same thing. World Eaters tend to score very well, even if your plan isn't going quite well.
Mm-hmm.
Orcs do need their plan to work, so there are some situations where that can just not work out well for you. But in the kind of the Orcs World Eaters matchup, all your stuff kills each other, and orcs have more of it, coupled with the vehicles and the transports. And also, one of the most important units in the orc army are storm boys, and storm boys have fly, obviously, and they auto advance 6, so they go 18 inches before the charge. And what that lets me do is, when people try to move block you or find ways of kind of bubble wrapping their units or their characters, Storm Boys don't let them do that. So between the special character Zach struck with the 25 Storm Boys that were in my list, they jump over the lines and then hit all the juicy stuff behind the shell of bubbles and screens. And World Eaters don't have access to that. They don't have the fly.
God damn it, Brian! You have something about the way you talk about orcs that makes me want to pick up orcs now.
Sure.
Yeah, probably. I might. I used to play them in the past, but dropped them for other armies. Now I regret it. But anyway, moving on. Pumba, you said that initially there was a plan for you to bring Dark Angels, and you got convinced into bringing Iron Hands. Why?
So, my experiences with Dark Angels after the Space Marines got gigabuffed and completely gotten insane is first preparing for the ITD, for which I brought a very specific Raven wing list, which just couldn't work or like under any other rule set than a UKTC. So that was off the table completely. Then I kind of like jumped around the idea of playing something similar to what Manny brought to ITT and what was becoming very popular in the greater, like in the most of the world, I think, which is bringing a big chunk of Terminators, say about 20 to 30 of them, and combining them with either speeders at first, and then after all the Desolation metagame with Desolators. About 15 of them, I guess. And that list generally seems pretty strong, but I wasn't in love with it. I don't know what you mean. Like, if you know what I mean, this list kind of felt like it did everything and like tried to do everything, as in like I shoot you well behind walls, and I've got some speed and angle catching with Tunnelmasters, and then I push you with Terminators, which is a very like good game plan. But the gist of it was, Brian and Ines came back from home nations, where Ines, similar to Brian with Orcs, just completely destroyed and smashed face of everybody there with Iron Hands. And then I just straight up like went to them, like asked them like what's their list. They gave it to me, and I just straight up asked them, "Do you think this is better than Dark Angels?" And both of them said most like straight up yes, definitely. Like, all right, boys, I trust you completely, and we are picking that.
Okay. So
also there was like a element to that. Definitely was that even playing Iron Hands feels more enjoyable to me than just smashing bricks of Terminators across the table. And
absolutely,
Dark Angels are the most boring army in the game.
Yep, definitely.
So tell me, because you obviously brought in your list, as you mentioned, the Desolation squads. Again, the list will be available on our blog, so let's not go greatly into that detail. But Desolation Marines as a unit, was that something meta shaping at this event, or was this something that you as a team were afraid of or taking into consideration when, again, army picking, or not so much? Are they not that scary?
Oh, they are definitely a thing that impacted pairings. Like when considering what armies would people bring to the tournament, I think the thought of just every single either Iron Hands or Dark Angels is having them definitely shapes how the pairings went. I believe, like especially Brian's list, is put like his pairing into the Space Marines significantly changes based on if the opposing player, if the Space Marine player has Desolation Squads in it.
Yep.
Because they just disallow you to do your stuff by shooting out of line of sight and just decimating your lines way before they can actually reach you, or just they disallow you to do the basic thing that Brian previously described, as in you kill the transport, you jump out into the ruin, and then you actually get shot in the ruin, right? It's a huge deal, like, but whenever people didn't bring them, I think that also just made pairings just easier, legitimately.
It helped
Okay.
that Innes and I were part of the original Sin at Manchester, running 20 of the 42 Desolation Marines that were in the top 4 there. So we were well aware of how strong they were and how they flipped a lot of matchups in games. So they really informed decisions. I think the thing that we were hoping when we were writing our lists, and I think this is largely proved to be true, is that they're still a very new unit, and so a lot of people just don't have access to them.
Yeah.
And also didn't really understand how good they were.
So I listened to the Fireside podcast before the London Open event. David Gaylord is probably one of the most heartbroken people when it comes to Desolation Marines and how they manhandle guard. So
Brian surely has heard a lot of that in the recent weeks.
Right.
Dave's not a fan.
Right, exactly. So is that also the reason why you didn't take guard, or is it what Brian, what you mentioned earlier, that essentially when you take Iron Hands, it makes no sense to take guard because they would be fighting for the tables and so on. So which one was it?
It was a factor that we considered for sure, but at least I personally was less concerned about that, again because of the. I expected to see Desolation Marines, but I didn't expect it to be wildly prevalent. Again because of access, and that hadn't quite filtered out to the rest of the meta yet. But the main reason was board choice. Once we had Iron Hands, and we all kind of collectively agreed that Iron Hands have no bad matchups on a board of their choice, then it made way less sense to take guard.
Right.
Yeah, it would be definitely also way more difficult to pair, especially that you didn't have you weren't guaranteed to get the board choice, and in this situation, a gun line that the guard might actually struggle into some matchups that you wouldn't expect it to struggle against. The big factor in not choosing guard was definitely also the fact that none of us was a straight up guard player. Someone would need to pick up the army and learn it by heart to bring to the event, just for this event almost. Which is doable, absolutely. You can definitely, it's a viable choice. I believe most of us, if not all of us, are very good players that could definitely pick the army up and not slack off on it, wouldn't be bad at it. But it's not super army comfort that you get when people are playing their specific stuff, which they are just excellent at.
Okay, so I understand how you pretty much had the comfort of changing armies until the very last moment, until pretty much the list submission deadline.
No, we had the comfort of throwing Brian around from army to army. Most of us had them picked way before.
I still have whiplash.
but you knew exactly what you said, that even if it came to anyone getting an army that they are that they don't play regularly, it wouldn't have been that difficult to actually pull off some wins with it. What about the other aspect of preparation for an event like this one? So the matrices and trying to predict how the pairings are going to go, etc., etc. Did you actually do that as well? Did you have an Excel file and each and every single one of you have to, mark your matchups green and yellow and red and something? Or did you completely forego this, knowing that your team is a powerhouse and you are, almost top of the world?
We
So
definitely did some prep. I mean, we're confident players, but we're not fools. So yeah, we looked at a number of teams that we recognized had a strong chance of, if we had a good run, that we would run into, and did some prep on those for sure.
yeah, so I was basically delegated to be the dad of the team, and just bitch about everybody actually filling out their matrices. About there wasn't a lot, to be honest. Like we weren't just filling out 40 tables
Obviously.
for every single team, but we chose like 5 or 6 teams that we knew we can definitely play them. They are of a good level, and these we really wanted to be prepared for. We definitely hedged some bets at which of like what some of the teams might be bringing to have an answer for them in our team comp. I think on the evening of list submission, when the whole army swapping happened, me and Ines and Typhus tried to do some mock-up pairings for example, Team Poland or the German team, the Breaking Heads team that was coming to an event, to actually decide which army fits us better. And it actually I think that one of the things that I've said at that moment when we chose to put Brian's on orcs is I would rather have an excellent player on his super comfort list that he's just absolutely and proven to be absolutely amazing at, than have that like 10% better, possibly better matrix into teams.
Okay. So tell me, because again, we're not going to go through every game and every matchup. I absolutely don't want to do that. We don't have time for this. So let's approach this in a little bit different way. You had 5 armies. Again, Gene Stealers, Orcs, World Eaters, Iron Hands, and Necrons. Which of those armies, Pumba or Typhus, whoever was doing the pairing process, which of those armies would you usually start with? For example, would you open with? Well, did you have like a designated army for that? Where Necrons come to my mind as one that possibly or potentially could do that. Was there like any army that you would use in every single pairing process as the first one?
So we didn't have a designated defender from the team comp. We knew we had armies that definitely are good defenders, but it all came down to matrices. And I believe 4 out of 5 times we defended with World Eaters.
Interesting. Okay. Is there any army that World Eaters don't want to face?
There's a good amount of them, I would say, still. Which basically, what happened, and this is important, is we accepted that Anthony will be bust, as you say. So he will be thrown under the bus. He's supposed to score some points, keep it close to a draw, perhaps, if that's possible, and then just take the one of the worst pairings and worst armies for our team and be happy with it, so we can get better pairings later, as to protect like me on Iron Hands from bad pairings or Brian on Orcs, for example. These were the main 2 mindsets, like when we were coming to the pairings after a while of doing them and realizing this is very like a very strong word to pair our team comp. And the funny thing about that is we also realized this when building a team, that many of our armies are in this kind of valley of not many people are experienced against. Like, as you've said, these aren't the immediate armies that you would consider the very top of the meta. At least not all of them, like Iron Hands, obviously, but even Eaters, maybe Necrons, Orcs, are not armies that you would consider to be absolutely the top of the meta.
Yeah, totally.
And we kind of hedged that people would be not very prepared into those armies played by excellent players. So what happened is, if you do that, and you, for example, as we discussed, defended with World Eaters with Anthony, many of the times he would get orange matchup, a drawish matchup, a yellow matchup, as you say, and absolutely smash it. Because people were just not experienced enough playing against a good player playing that army. And that army just punishes mistakes in droves. Like, you fuck around and you find out very quickly, and the slapback is immense when that happens.
Yeah, it's very
So-
very smart to to leverage that.
Yep. So because of that, many of the times Anthony would just first up, bust, completely thrown into a horrible matchup. He goes to the board. He says that board isn't very good, even for me. Like, and that matchup is absolutely terrible. And I go, all right, chill out, man. We know you're supposed to bring like a 5 to a 7. This will be fine. Keep it close. You're good. We know you are getting screwed right here. And then, like, after third turn, he would come up to me. All right, should I push for a 20 or keep it a 17 because I am good just doing bad things to these people?
So many times.
Yep, that happened a lot. Let's be clear here. Anthony went undefeated at this event.
Yeah, 17-3, 12-8. Where is
A
he?
20-0 and
20-0.
18 and a 14.
Yeah, that's
4 of
amazing.
these was basically first defender. And the bust. So he went top 8 scorer as a first defender who was supposed to just take the worst matchup for our army so we can chill out later.
Oh shit! I see he 20-0 Danny with his GSC. That's something. And
Yep,
Victor from the Polish national team.
on Gene Stealer Curse that is, and I don't believe Danny would be happy to talk about the game because from what I've heard, he got giga scammed on dice in that game. Like, Anthony was not supposed to win that matchup at all, and
he brought
especially
20.
not that hard. Yeah.
Jesus. Poor Danny. But Victor as well. I see Victor who is trialing for the Polish national team. He also got beat. So yeah, I mean, amazing performance.
The story of that game, just to mention very quickly, just don't. If you have the possibility, what I've learned is you should never allow Anthony to roll invens at you. In any case, like, just, I don't know, use mortals. I don't know, ignore those invens in any way. Because apparently, if you just allow him to roll those 4-up invens on like Exalted 8-bound in the middle of your deployment zone, he might just make 32 out of 33 saves.
No way.
He literally was it? Yeah, I think it was 32 out of
30. 32 out of 34.
Yeah,
He failed 2 saves.
he failed 2 4-ups on that unit.
I don't know if you know this about Eldar, but that's usually not a good sign.
Yeah, that's definitely not what you want to do.
Could be a game over for the other guy, for Victor again. But yeah, good on Anthony. So that's world leaders. We know about that. Brian, what about orcs? Were there any armies that you in particular didn't want to face, or having your experience playing this army in singles, in team events, and so on, you were pretty much prepared to take on anything?
I knew what I had to do into every army that I could have played. But there are definitely armies that I did not want to play against. For example, if I got jammed into Terminators, I know that I can play that to a 10. I also know that I'm going to kill about 5 models that entire game, and none of them are going to be Terminators. So it's going to be miserable. So I didn't want to play it because it wouldn't be fun, but I recognized that I could. And Guard were another one which I can definitely win the game, but it can also go really badly. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. One of the matchups that I was very confident in was World Eaters, which I got was actually my 12-8. But I knew that was a matchup that I can win, and that's because I'd played it a whole bunch. So I think my experience with the army really came into play here, which was nice because I could give pretty reasonable estimates on all my stuff. Although personally, I tend to be pretty conservative and probably too conservative with my estimates. So that's a weakness that I'm trying to shore up. But I think Guinness says I respect my opponents too much, which sounds worse than it probably is.
No, it's actually
that's
good.
a very nice thing to say, to be honest.
Yeah.
But you had a good opportunity to practice here. So again, for the sake of our listeners, how do orcs play into Space Marines with Desolation squads? I interviewed Alex Harrison not so long ago, after his second place at the tournament where you took
Yeah, I
fourth.
think Brian remembers.
Yeah. So I spoke to him about that, and I think he played Orcs twice at that event, and it wasn't like a good showing for Orcs. With all respect to the players, they weren't you. So how do you play into Space Marines with Desolation Squads? And I'm talking Space Marines of all flavors.
So one thing that's really important and a difference between UKTC and what I was doing is the terrain set. UKTC is much more open. And so my army that has the biggest gun being a big shooter would be much more susceptible to Desolation Marines on that kind of terrain set because they can just sit there and shoot super crack, which is still one of my favorite phrases, super crack missiles at you all day long. But I mean, the key is really feeding your units out of your transports at the right times. So you don't just put all your grats, for example, out to do good bits at once. You feed them out slowly, and you're probably going to score pretty well. Orcs in general are pretty hard to not have score pretty decently, but it's just challenging. I mean, you have to pressure them as quickly as possible. The Terminator build in particular is quite difficult because they have this line of things that you can't kill. So it's really about your opponent making mistakes and leaving gaps and places for you to exploit. And I think if a Dark Angel player plays the game perfectly, I don't think Orcs can win or even keep it relatively close. But it's extremely difficult to play it perfectly. You can't expose, like, for example, one of my tactics there is you take Assassinate because you always have a lot of characters. So you have to play it so your characters are never exposed because Orcs are so fast that if you make a mistake with the placement of a character, it's just going to die to Zagstruck or Bike Boss or Storm Boys or something else.
Yeah, because they don't have influence and so on.
Exactly. But the Dark Angel player is all the agency in that. It's just really hard to execute that on a board in a game where clock's running, and it's round whatever of the tournament. So.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could jump in for a second, because like just listening now to Brian talk about his orcs, for example, and something that I've discussed previously is hedging on opponents, like not knowing your army, not having experience. This is something that I've learned throughout this whole event when talking to Brian, Ines, and Anthony particularly, because I know obviously I knew like Typhus's perspective on that. Oftentimes we'll talk about matrices or pairings for Team Poland, for example, or for my team, wherever I go. And I will also often say that I do the matrices expecting a perfect play for both sides. What I've really realized during this event, and like even looking back at the past WTC when we played, for example, Australia, and they had this like insane lineup of lists. Sometimes you really need to hedge that the opponents don't have perfect information, don't know, and they will actually not play perfect game of 40k. Perfect games of 40k rarely happen, and I think even though I kind of knew it, obviously, because I've been playing this game a lot for the last some years, I think like those guys made me realize this even harder, that there's a big value in people not knowing your army. There's a big value in people not realizing exactly how to play the matchup, like exactly millimeter, like perfect micro and macro. That those games just don't happen. And what's your upside if that actually they do a mistake, right?
Yeah, I mean, hell, if the whole team Australia, I guess, pulled this off and embodies what you just said with the last WTC. They brought lists that nobody understood how they work, and look what it gave them. So,
yep,
it must be true. All right, tell me about Necrons, and then probably we can move on to the topic of the data slate. Again, Typhus's list. You mentioned Necrons were supposed to be the counter to guard. Were there any particular matchups that you were afraid of that you wouldn't like this to be paired, or like whatever?
Generally, Necrons worked well against a guard answer. Typhus played them 2 times. We attacked enemies' guards 3 times with them, one of which they took me, and I think regretted very quickly that decision was made.
Mm-hmm.
But he pulled very good results in guard, especially picking their tables. He was a very reliable into that matchup, which we really hoped for. And generally, Necrons are very hard to not. Similarly to even orcs, one of the things that we had going in our team, if you look at the team comp, there's no army that just doesn't score for free almost. There's not a single army that has not reliable secondaries, and any army is just incredibly difficult to zero. I don't believe we've gotten like any of our matchups wasn't, I think, a zero ever. Which also is the thing with Necrons, which makes them very reliable as an army. Even if they don't get the perfect matchup you are hoping for, they will still bring points from anything. They definitely didn't particularly want to play like against Space Marines because they are just a menace.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I believe most of like Typhus' tables with that army was yellowish, which is completely fine, right?
Mm-hmm. And tell me about the matchup with against demons, because I see when you were playing, I think the French team with Danny, Typhus played against Chaos Demons, and looking at the score, Demons took that 16-4. Uh, Looking just at the score, I was sure to see like a Zinch list, pure Zinch that definitely uh, can withstand all the firepower that Necrons can bring into this matchup. But I see that the list is actually a mixed Demons army. There are Beasts of Nurgle, there are Zinch elements and other elements as well. So was that a pairing that you wanted, or was that like a pairing that Typhus took so that nobody else had to pick this opponent?
So the gist of it is we really weren't very familiar with like this kind of mixed demons disciples
Mm-hmm.
list.
That
So
got better and trickier.
none of us were particularly happy to be playing against it because nobody was experienced against it, of course. And because of just how the pairings went out, Typhus got that pairing, which he assessed to be a drawish matchup. But obviously, like everybody was kind of like, is it a draw? We don't know. We just put a draw because kind of we
Mm-hmm.
aren't familiar. Uh, and he got bodied kind of from what I've seen. Um, there's a quick note here, like a very small notice, because I believe in that game it was assumed that the war dogs in that list, so the chaos detachment, kind of gained access to the dread table from the chaos knights, which for example can remove obsec from your necrons.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, that is not the case for the list. It doesn't get access to that. That was a very honest mistake to make. So let's be clear. Like I'm not accusing anything of cheating in any way,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a very like detailed mistake and like something that you can easily miss when constructing a list. But that definitely impacted a matchup a little bit. But yeah, generally we weren't comfortable into that list. The player playing that list also did like incredible things during this tournament. Like went super hard and believe it was the higher scored of the huge event next to Brian. So this is kind of a similar story, right? A list that's like looks very unfamiliar and isn't super popular, just doing very good in a player in the hands of a skilled player that knows it very well.
Yeah, and we're talking. I'm looking at the list right now. It's Matt Tanker Bonnet, and to be perfectly honest, kudos to him because the list is cool. It's I'll read it out really quickly just because I want people to understand what we're talking about. We have Bellacore, Fate Skimmer, a Transweaver. I don't think I've even heard that name before.
That's just a Slanesh Herald.
Yeah, but still, like, okay, maybe I just haven't met him yet. The Transweaver, I mean. 3 Nurglings, 3 Beasts of Nurgle, 5 Flamers, 3 Fiends, another 3 Fiends, 5 Fleshhounds, a Skull Cannon, and then 3 Warlock Brigands. And that's it. And apparently it plays well. So kudos to him, really. it's nice to see non-standard lists doing well. But of course, the pilot behind the list is as important as the list itself, if not more. Last question about this tournament. Has Innes actually given you any reds in the Matrix, or was he confident enough to say that everything is green?
I believe he also was one of the people who just refused to play Terminators. And in general, Desolators are just a big no for GSC to get approached by. I think when we played against the Spanish team and they had Thousand Suns, that was also just a matchup that he definitely didn't want to play. But other than that, GSC, again, similar story with all of our lists. Very good scoring potential, list that can catch you off guard. Even still, after all those months passed and all of those metas, people still are not super aware how to play against GSC, and especially to the standard that you are required when playing somebody like Innes. And he actually wasn't paired 4, so he was this kind of person who just took whatever came to him in pairings, and again did incredibly well into most of the field.
Okay, so let's use Innes and his army as a segue to the second part of the podcast. So the balancing data slate, and I don't think we are going to devote as much time to this as we did to the Alpine Cup. But I just want to, run quickly through the armies and see what your feelings are. The next big thing in the meta is going to be, or what the meta is actually going to be shaped like. So let's look at Gene Stealers. Definitely in Innes's hands or Eric Lathoris's hands, this army is extremely strong. I think in recent weeks, months, we've seen the popularity of this army grow. More and more players started playing it. The win rates for the army were really high. Was that down to very strong secondaries, or even now after the balancing data slate, when some of the secondaries got toned down, are we still going to see Gene Stealer cults up there at the top of the meta watches and so on? Brian, what do you think?
I mean, I think they're still a very strong army. Brainstorm getting toned down, I think it was Brainstorm, helps. Certainly helps. But Gene Stealer cult as a codex largely gets a lot of ground out of exactly what we've been talking about for the Alpine Cup and army selections in general. It's a very difficult codex to have experience into because it's not super common, and it plays so radically different than anything else you've ever played against.
Yeah.
And also in my experience, I respect the damage out of it, but you never know. It either does 0 or it does 1 billion damage. And you can never quite tell, so you kind of have to assume it's 1 billion every time, which makes it very hard to play around. So the change to Brute Swarm is going to help with the scoring potential of the army. But as Typhus said, or sorry, Pumba said, the prevalence of Desolation Marines, and frankly what I assume is going to be even more Desolation Marines, is going to really hurt them quite a bit, because one of the things that they relied on, certainly on boards like UKTC, is the ability to stick out a couple cool guns, shoot with them, somebody would shoot back, they'd kill a lot of the squad of 20 neophytes, but not the entire squad, and then you would be able to regrow the weapons and be just as offensively effective, because you couldn't kill the entire squad in one activation because you just pull the guys in line of sight, right? But Desolation Marines means that that's not a problem anymore, because you shoot them and then you indirect the rest of them. So that's kind of a nightmare scenario for them.
All right, Pumba, any extra thoughts on this?
I believe Brian is given like a very interesting take because he still, even though he's been playing for Team Scotland for a long time, still I think is playing a very singles-minded approach. Yeah, in which you need to be expecting to be very, very prepared into things like Space Marines, who are going to be everywhere all the time. But when talking about teams, which is what interests me the most, is that the scoring potential of GSC has been cut a little bit down, but they still have just behind enemy lines in the same space of that the Brutes one was in, and they are just still extremely good into a lot of armies, and they provide answers to armies that usually you can't find many answers for. So they are still as excellent as they used to be. And as Brian said, getting practice into them is still an absolute pain because of how difficult the codex itself is to pilot. None of your practice may actually turn out to be valuable practice unless you are playing some of the best players in the world.
Yeah, so a couple of points of takeaways here. First of all, this army is extremely difficult to train into or against because in many local metas you just don't see it. It's hard to collect. It's hard. It's expensive to collect. You need a lot of models to do that. So probably the best way, if you haven't done it yet and you're thinking what to do while waiting for the 10th edition, get on TTS, get involved in, I don't know, Copenhagen or try hard leagues or whatever. Just get into a league. I'm sure you're going to face Gene Stealers there, and try and face them, see what they do, read up on them, and so on and so on, preparing for the game, because it's really fun to play against them, but it can they can bite you really bad.
Disagree on the fun part there, but that's fine.
Same.
I mean, it's fun to learn what they do. Even if you lose, or at least that was my experience.
I've been bad touched by Innis, and I think Pumba's been bad touched by Myson, so that's
perhaps too many times.
Yeah.
So that's one. Two, perhaps try picking this up yourself, especially now when we are preparing for the 10th edition, and you can try all the craziest builds out there, and maybe it's time to try and pick up a new army, at least virtually. So maybe while going into those TTS leagues, try picking up GSC and see for yourself if it's easy to navigate to pilot or not. And the last thing, it's completely different, or it changes the perspective when you look at events that are team events and events that are singles. And I think to the players who don't attend team events a lot, one thing that we need to mention is that when you play in teams, be it 8-man teams, 5-man teams, 3-man teams, the usual rule of thumb is that you cannot duplicate armies, or you cannot take two armies of the same. Two players cannot take the same faction twice. Meaning, in an 8-man team, you are still only going to see one Adeptus Astartes army or one Eldari army or what have you. So I think, Pumba, this is what you meant, right? That about Brian's singles mindset. You don't have to worry that much about Space Marines in a team setting, because if you do the pairings right, your GSC player might actually never face Adeptus Astartes.
That's exactly what I meant. You just dodge that one matchup that is terrible for them, which obviously is terrible on paper and practice many of the times, and you still rely on them to be extremely good into most of the field.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that was Gene Stealer cards. Brian, let's give you the mic for orcs. No changes to the orcs. Is that good for them, or is that bad of them in the grander scheme of things and in the whole context of all the other changes?
Orcs desperately needed massive buffs. No, I think it's fine. I think orcs are still very well positioned. The Dark Angels being put in the ground is very good for orcs. I think that there's only a couple, from a team's perspective, there's only a couple armies you really have to dodge, and everything else you have a game or you dumpster, is like a better word. And from a singles perspective, you can build your lists to beat even the hard ones. So I think orcs are really well positioned right now. I think
that's definitely not something most of our players would like to hear.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna put it out there.
I think that a lot of times when it comes to orcs, a lot of P-time players will not quite. I mean, you benefit a lot by playing and strengthening your fundamentals, and I think that you gain a lot of ground out of the orc book when you are become much better at things like controlling combats or activation locking your opponents, or things that are good in every army, but become particularly effective in the Orc Codex, where your army is largely pretty fragile, um, and can hard lose to certain matchups if you're not careful about those strong fundamentals. So, both in the perspective of the Dataslate coming out and with 10th edition around the corner, getting all those kinds of fundamental plays will be helpful when the new edition rolls around and with this new Dataslate. So strengthening those, I think, really gives the army quite a bit of bandwidth.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Pumba, I need to ask about Anthony's army. So world leaders. I over the last couple of days, ever since the Dataslate dropped, I've heard. Oh, well, there is sort of a dualism online because obviously World Eaters players rejoice that they haven't been touched, but there are also people who say that it's a shame that they haven't been touched because some of the secondaries, especially secondaries that the World Eaters have, could have been toned down a little bit. What's your take on it? Are World Eaters in the right place? Are they too strong? What do you think?
Looking at I think from the singles perspective, which I'm just trying to imagine because I'm not a very singles-minded player, I think they are completely.
So much.
I think they are completely fine in singles, because they are an army that's very monophase and that does have a lot of bad matchups, and it's very difficult to actually tune your list towards that matchups. As Brian said, I think it's very much easier for orcs to tune into some of the more difficult things than it would be for world eaters, because that would require. They are not a deep codex in terms of data, like pure data sheets. They are more of this new style of codex that is very limited in their options of relics, for example, and warlord traits. So they don't have that many exciting options or to just switch to a different playstyle. So they are very what you see is what you get faction, kind of thing. So in terms of singles, I believe they aren't an army that would be jumping to the top tables on super majors and smashing it out there, because I think they will
X and 1 heroes, right?
Yeah, exactly. They would be definitely getting. All they need is to get one of those very very bad matchups that can happen, and they are out of it. In terms of teams, they are basically unchanged enough, if not better, again, because some of the field and their predators, like their Archangels, just went down. So in terms of teams, I think they are completely fine. They're absolutely amazing army to have in your team comp.
Okay, great. Brian, will you be going back to any flavor of Space Marines after the Dataslate?
No. It's the easy answer. I have a limited number of events coming up before 10th edition. So I have a singles event that's Warhammer Fest, which is Games Workshop style terrain. So orcs are pretty incredible on that terrain. It turns out if you're pretty close to your opponent with a wall between you and them, it's great for Storm Boys. And then I have a local event up here in Scotland, and then I have a team event. Probably I kind of want to play Eldar because I want to play the Codex before it rotates, just for funsies. Or I'll probably be playing Orcs because they fit really well into the tournament sequence. I think Marines are still very strong. I think Marines are Iron Hands in particular. I think are probably still the strongest army in the game. But I really like the position that Eldar have in against the top armies in the game. If you look at them as being, from a singles perspective, as being things like Guard or Iron Hands or these very heavy shooting armies. Eldar lists, and specifically I'm talking about kind of the Vic style or Liam style Eldar lists with a bit of a Harlequin detachment are really well positioned into those kind of looking at 12-8ish kind of game plans, and they require you to play really tight, which helps you improve as a player, which is always something I'm looking for.
So Vic placed, I think, 11th at London Open. do you think that this army has potential to go even higher, or is that sort of the
Oh, for sure.
play? Okay.
He definitely can. I mean, look at the path that Vic took through the London Open. I mean, he put away 42 Dark Angel Terminators when they still had the old rules.
Mhm.
He's played against Desolation Marines at Manchester twice. The army has the ability to beat all of these things. And the same kind of vein as Orcs. These are some of the older books in the sense of the ranges have been around forever. And a consequence of that is that they have a ton of choices with a ton of different models, and the books are very wide. And so because of that, you can really modify your lists and tweak your lists to be answers to almost anything the meta can provide. And I think Eldar are in a really good space for that right now.
Awesome. Pumba, I need to get back to you and get back to the topic of Space Marines just for a moment, because one of the flavors of Space Marines that got buffed was Death Watch. Would that be in our? Would that
It's coming. The Death Watch question.
You knew it was there. Like if there was any question going to be asked in this particular podcast, it has to be this one. So Death Watch, a date? What do you think?
So I was trying very hard on our way back from Leben to make it a thing that exists.
Mm-hmm.
I've been trying so hard. I spent like 2 hours convincing everybody in my car that this surely must now be a thing that exists, right, guys? And after those 2 hours, I believe it doesn't. And I lost that argument severely.
So
I think there's a mix of feedback from Anthony, Typhus, Danny even chipped in at some points, and me slowly realizing that even though they have all the tricks in the book, again this comes down to the old thing that Deathwatch always does in all of the editions and all of the codexes they get, is that they have a lot of options. A lot of them are very cute, a lot of them are potentially strong, but you kind of lack that sheer power that is very obvious to see and is just there for you to abuse. We are talking if you compare them to Iron Hands, they just don't have that sheer power of theirs. And I think there surely must be a way now to make them work for definitely an X and 1 bracket, but you could say that for almost any army I think in the game. And they're enormous problem, obviously. As for me, especially as a person who attends team tournaments, is they are competing for the same spot as Iron Hands Space Wolves, for example, are, which just it's so difficult to justify them in that sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I feel like they're in a similar world to me as AdMech, where you look at AdMech and you're like, surely there's a list here, and then you try to put it to paper, and it's just very hard.
Exactly. You just pick units that you think are going to work there, and they've got amazing buffs for it, and they are just amazing in different chapters. Stuck in the Slate Marines, right? Deathwatch can really put very good buffs on them. They can make them ignore cover and stuff. Then
they can choose the doctrine, right?
Yep, they can choose the doctrine. So they score, for example, Codex Warfare now very, very well. If you needed them to. And then you pick the best relics, some characters, and then you slowly start actually building lists. And when you end up with a list, you're very dissatisfied from my experience with it and how it would play on the actual table.
Okay, so let's leave Deathwatch then. But Pumba, while you have the mic, I'll use you to get an answer for my next question. I wonder, how did Anthony react to the Drukhari changes? Did he say anything about new core addition to the Talos, Kronos, and so on?
I'm trying to remember now. On our drive home, did we actually talk about anything Drukhari related? I think
right there is your answer. He would have been it's impossible to shut up about it if he was excited.
True. That would definitely happen. Although I might have just shut him down because I hate Drukhari so much. I'm just refusing to acknowledge that this army exists, and I'm really enjoying my time when they are down in the garbage. But yeah, if it was the thing that he definitely like, if he considered that buff to be super impactful, he would definitely just straight up jump into that list. And to fix City again, that he's a big like proprietor of.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that something might move, but it won't generally impact the game super hard, especially with the top being a little bit unchanged. So as we discussed previously, that's the case like for most of the Dataslate. I think some impact might be done, some buffs from the below, but I don't think enough for the armies to jump into like their new heights, and some stuff from the top, like the Dark Ages getting decimated, but other than that, almost nothing changed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Brian. I also have to ask you because you have some insider knowledge into Team Ignite. Do you think that the Astra Militarum changes will see players like David Gaylord change armies, or I don't know, Nassim go back to Tau perhaps?
I think that it significantly weakens guard. I think it's definitely a possibility.
So do you think to the point that the popularity of army will drop, or not so much?
It's hard. It's kind of the age-old saying, guard will never be above a 50% win rate. It's a very popular army. Same if it works. People are going to play them no matter what. They're going to be a large chunk of the meta no matter what. But from the top end of the table, in terms of people trying to play the strongest factions, they give them the best chance for winning. I personally don't believe that guard are that faction anymore. With the introduction of Desolation Marines and a number of the other armies that are kind of like the builds that are resulting from that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do you think that? So yeah, let's drop guard because again, probably everyone knows what the changes are already. But do you think, again, that players like Nassim, for example, would pick up Tau after the changes, or is Tau not that strong in the meta, even with broadsides getting core?
I think Tau got a big buff in the form of broadsides, but I think the problem is people look at indirect, I think, usually wrong, and they look at indirect wanting to kill other indirect, and that's how they evaluate whether it's going to be good or not. And what you really are looking at here is an attrition battle between armies, where you don't have to expose resources, and then you want to be the one that's winning that attrition battle. And in the form of broadsides, allowing Tau to play that attrition battle, they are very effective in terms of dealing damage. And if on the right train sets, they can actually position really well with their 30-inch range guns and fight that. But the problem that Tau face is that they're cheap, effective point-grabbing units get absolutely obliterated by things like Desolation Marines and other indirect things like Crude Hounds and Crute. And so they have a lot of trouble playing the mission later in the game as a result of that. And that's where Tau want to score all their points is late in the game with Kion. So I think this helped Tau. I don't think they're going to be good enough now.
Okay. Pumba, I have to ask you about your thoughts on Custodes. I don't know if you spoken to Victor, for example, about what's going on, but recently the 20 Wardens list was making rounds. Liam Hackett won a tournament with it. I think that was the only tournament that actually Custodes have won, and perhaps the change in the latest Dataslate is a little bit uncalled for. But still, do you think that we are, well, Custodes players are going back to the Dread list, or are they still going to play 20 Wardens?
So I think Custodes were fine. First of all, I think they were a fine army. That was an army that some people took up and did extremely well with. They weren't definitely meta-defining or like the army that you just prepared for on the top tables, especially. And I really kind of feel like this was uncalled for. At the same time, like, this is the duality, because I think it's overall good for the game that the super defensive buffs that they were able to put in no longer stack, but I think this should just be the case from the very start of the codex, And to make this change so far into the edition after the codex came out, and they played with it after the last slate that they've made, that they reversed the change just because one list has gotten kind of popular, not even like meta-defining popular, and they won one event with it, which was also Liam freaking Hackett, which I believe could have won that event with almost anything. I think it is a bit
Sigma army.
Yeah, basically. I think it is kind of uncalled for. Though I also think most of the custodies lists can just pivot and do something else. I've actually, which is a good point. We've seen a lot of good, interesting lists for custodies at Alpine. One of the top three team, Breaking Heads, guys from Germany, brought a Shadow Keepers list, which did extremely well in the tournament as well. I think this is very much worth looking at if you're a custodies player, for example. I think there are ways to make the army work again, just differently than previously, and most definitely not in the style of Warden spamming bricks, strolling down the middle of the board.
All right. Okay, gents, listen, I think we somehow went through the most affected armies by the Dataslate, and I don't think we need to spend a lot more time going into the details, because changes to factions like Tyranids, or the let's say the gravitas of the changes to armies like Tyranids, probably will not turn the whole meta upside down. So we can skip it. Everyone knows what the changes are already anyway. So I'll just ask you for the last sentence or last paragraph of summary. How do you two think is the meta going to shape up? Is it going to be dominated by Distillation squads? And then does that mean that people are going to be building lists against them? Does that mean we will see, I don't know, more transports in the meta? What do you think? Whoever wants to start.
Yeah, I guess I can start. So I think there's definitely going to be more transports. I think people are going to try and build to survive in direct, because not every army has access to it. But I also think that it's going to be an overreaction. You know, Marines are popular, but in any given tournament, you'll play them even if they're at their peak twice, maybe. So you're still playing 3 other armies over the course of that event. So in a 5-round event, excuse me. And of course, that's always from a singles perspective. You know, from a team's perspective, it's different still.
Okay.
Yep. I think Marines are just insane still. I think the changes to Codex Warfare are almost, I want to say, negligible. I mean, it does impact the army scoring, but it doesn't impact fundamentally how the army works. And I think they've got plenty of options to still make it, make themselves absolutely incredible on the table and on the scoring sheet as well. Space Wolves are absolutely insane as well. I even don't know if they might be better than Iron Hands, possibly. Up in the air, I think. So the top of the meta got cut by just one army, I think. Maybe Guard is one of the armies that would get definitely join like Dark Angels from in being cut from the very top of the meta. But other than that, we are kind of still in the same alley. Demons are still just crazy, and they've gotten no changes whatsoever. They are very strong.
And their secondaries again.
Yep, and the secondaries are still absolutely insane. But as some of the events that we've seen lately have taught me, not everything that is just insane at the first glance can be insane. Or is what I mean by that is you can still, especially to a team event, which I recommend everybody to go to because it's still I think the best way to enjoy Warhammer. You can bring different armies. You can be a faction specialist in this very end of the edition, especially if you just want to. You can do so many things right now. You can like super tune in your very army and your list to work for you and do very well. You can jump to a new army and learn it to be prepared for like a new edition if you want to switch playstyles, for example. It's still a great time to be playing 40k right now. And if you enjoy the game right now, you shouldn't get discouraged by just addition and switching. You can still enjoy it as it is, and you can do amazing things at tournaments with things that definitely didn't immediately jump at you as being completely bonkers.
Beautiful. Brian, last piece of advice for people, again, how to stay in the game and not get discouraged by the 10th edition. Anything that you practice yourself that maybe you want to pass on to other people?
So, I mean, I have a couple good examples here. So first off, I'm painting and playing an Elder army. I have not played the Codex Audition. It's a great time to pick up an army that you haven't played, that you maybe thought was really cool, and just give them a go. This is your last chance to kind of play them with the rule set they currently have. So whether that's in TTS or in real life, it's an opportunity to kind of get them out there and enjoy them. Maybe they're not the strongest army, but you always thought their rule set was super cool. And beyond that, it's practicing fundamentals. So things like threat, evaluating risk and positioning your models. Like all these kinds of skills are going to translate really well into 10th edition. It's still a game of toy soldiers on the battlefield, and those fundamental core components are going to be true regardless of the rule set.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice, and I guess I can sign my name under that as well. Rules, those tiny rules for units, tiny rules for models might change. The general play styles of armies probably will transfer well into the next edition. So be open to experimentation. If you haven't played a gunline army before, give that a go. Try Tau, try Astra Militarum, try Votan. If you haven't played a combat army and you usually played the army like Tau, for example, that doesn't like engagement, switch it up completely. Play something else. Learn the rules of engagement, of combat, of using and remembering to use pylons and consolidations, because so many people still don't use it. Just do that, and you might find a new army that you want to play that you didn't realize existed before. So yeah, that's.
If I might jump in for just
sure,
a quick
absolutely.
advice, because it just came to my mind and I think it's very valuable. If you have the opportunity, I think everybody should try at least to find a team of sorts. It might be just a group of local players. It might be someone online that you vibe with. It might be generally find to try. If you want to improve, especially, just try and find people, like-minded people who you enjoy playing with, talking with about Warhammer, and this is, I think, is a great time to do it, because it not only does it like prepare you for the new edition, you have someone to talk with about what's happening to the rules are changing, and after the edition drops, it will be a great research for you yourself to have to actually play test it, to actually find out what the edition plays like, to make your opinions like and discover what the edition is about with players, with other people.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I think since joining Ignite, I've found I'm getting exposed to a lot more ideas. It's awesome to have people to chat with about lists, and also just having somebody to just be like, hey, I've got this wild new list I want to try. You want to give me a practice game real fast? And it's incredibly valuable.
Yeah,
even if it's just a group of friends.
Just a bunch of people to bounce ideas off and get a second opinion and a third opinion and a fourth opinion cannot be understated. So yeah, strongly recommend this to everyone. If you haven't done this yet, do. It's the best time to do that right now. Okay, I guess we can wrap the episode with this on this positive note. Thank you, gentlemen. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you. Your insights, as usual, invaluable. To our listeners, as I mentioned, please follow us on YouTube. Please follow us on other podcasting outlets. We are on Spotify. We are on Apple Podcasts, everywhere. We could use a review. We could use a thumbs up or a subscription. So don't hesitate and do that just now. As I said earlier, we have a blog now that I try to contribute to regularly, at least once a week. Again, life, family, work don't allow me to write as it's not Gunhammer, and it's not going to be Gunhammer, but it's on best effort basis to put out good content. So give it a read as well. As I said, the write up about Alpine and the list of the winning teams are going to be there. So give it a look and spread the word that this is also something that Contact Lost does. It will help us greatly to reach new audiences, and that's what we would like to achieve. With that, Brian, Pumba, I thank you. Is there anything that you guys would want to plug?
Just for a quick second, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank the whole team for this experience at Alpine. It was a general pleasure. That was one of the best, if not like the best tournament I've been to because of the people there.
And you've been to WTC.
Besides WTC, let's say besides WTC, because the WTC is like a thing of its own. But besides WTC, I think this was one of the most enjoyable tournaments I've ever been to. It was a pleasure to have the opportunity to play with such like incredible people, incredibly skilled, super fun to hang around with, and just learn so much from the experience. So thank you all guys for that. Thank you, Brian, for carrying the fuck out of this team, by the way, with your orcs. Yeah, and thank you for inviting me to the podcast again, and hope you hear you soon.
Always. Brian?
Yeah, I have to echo that. I mean, the team was so much fun, and it was the added benefit of we won the tournament. I mean, even if we had lost even a couple rounds, it wouldn't have mattered because the team was just an absolute blast to be on. Everyone was having a great time. From the games in between pairings, the chocolate dice back at the room after at the end of the night, it was just a great time, and easily one of the best experiences I've ever had at a tournament. So, and just also a quick shout out for Innocent Anthony with Stat Check. Please be sure to check them out. They've also great content. So if you enjoy this type of content, you'll enjoy theirs as well. And you mentioned Fireside before as well, with Vic and Dave from Ignite. So another great content. It's amazing how much good content there is out there now, and it's come from everywhere. And obviously like and subscribe to Contact Lost. Fantastic podcast, man.
Thank you. And I have to say, Typhus, who was also on the team, is part of Stats Check as well. He does coaching for teams.
Yes, of course, Typhus.
Yeah. So if anyone listening to this is interested, we're not getting paid for this advertisement, but what the hell? Go there, talk to Typhus, get some coaching. He'll teach you exactly how to do matrices, how to do pairings, etc., etc. Clearly, he knows his shit because the
go
guys
to Ines
here,
as well. By the way,
it's
really
absolutely,
good.
absolutely. Ines, Anthony, all of them. Clearly, they have just proven that they know what they preach. So yeah, give them a go, give them a try, give them some money because they are trying to make a living out of it. All right, enough sugar, enough sweets, enough kisses. Thank you guys, and until next time, bye bye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.